All right, guys, welcome back. In this segment, we're going to talk about the ring light. So in your scene or in any of the test scenes, just go ahead and double-click the ring light to bring it in. And I'm just going to pull out so we could see both of them. I'm actually going to pull the ring light down a bit just so we could see both of them. Now, traditionally, a ring light is used kind of two ways. One is kind of like as a global light. And this is kind of the default. It kind of has like an overhead light, kind of like the overhead softbox. It's just kind of like a general fill for the whole scene, you know? And the other way to use a ring light, we'll try in a little bit, but that's when you shoot directly through a ring light, kind of like this. So we're gonna play around with both. First, we're gonna just talk about some of the settings of a ring light, and then I'll show you kind of how to set it up for each kind of way to use it. So again, by default, we have just kind of general bulbs in a circle. Our settings are the first ones are pretty easy here. We have brightness, obviously. You can turn it up, turn it down. Now, brightness can get finicky because there's so many lights in the scene. So sometimes you only need just a little bit of brightness push to really blow things out. So keep that in mind. Ring size kind of moves all the bulbs out and in, depending on how big you want your ring light. You can make it way larger or smaller. The amount of bulbs fills in or releases some of the balls from the actual light. So if you want a bunch of them, you can crank them up. And now you can see actually for every bulb we add, it does get brighter. So we do actually have to turn the brightness down a little bit. So there we go. There's more bulbs at a dimmer kind of pace there. So we can reverse that, and now we have less bulbs at a brighter brightness, and so you could play around with that. That'll also give you different reflections. It'll also depending on your shadow settings, give you different shadow patterns depending on how much more or less lights there are. So and we'll play around with those as well. Now, the next setting here is round bulb versus fluorescent bulb. And if you go to fluorescent bulb and you actually turn down the amount of bulbs, you can see here we have kind of this fluorescent tube. It's a little fat to be a fluorescent tube. So if we go down here to the fluorescent bulb options, we can actually shrink that and make it more like a fluorescent tube. And this just emulates, again, just more of a fluorescent look for your reflections than a round bulb look. So it all depends on kind of what you want your reflections to look like. In this case, you can see we have these nice, cool kind of bars. This can also be used if you just use, go back up and you only set it to 4, and you kind of crank up your bulb length and get the right thing. You can kind of get this little box light here, which is kind of a cool effect. Depending on, too, on if you catch the reflection just right, maybe we could turn up the brightness a little bit. You can see we start to get these cool reflections, these kind of stripy reflections. So you could play around with that as well. I'm going to stick it back to the round bulb just for now, so we could see a little bit more of the variation. The round bulb settings are just the size of the bulb, so you can make them really fat or small. So you could just kind of get the scaling right. Below the round bulb, fluorescent bulb option is the light color, and this is same as in other rigs. You could just kind of tint the light a little bit, and that will tint the light scene. Remember that lights are rarely white, almost never. You always want to add almost just a little bit of a hint of a color in each of your lights, and that will just make it a little bit more realistic. So in this case, fluorescent lights are kind of usually this weird green kind of tint. So if we just add just a little tinge of green to it, sometimes that'll help, especially if you're going to use the fluorescent bulbs. Fluorescent bulbs at like an office, kind of have this weird greenness to them. So you can play around with those colors. Next, we have the shadow options. Now, I've gone through the shadow options before, but all the same ones are here. We have the shadow types. You can set it to area shadows, which will give you a more realistic look, but as you can see, does take longer to render. With your area shadows set, you have your area shadow accuracy and quality, which will speed up and slow down these area shadow renders significantly. I talk about that in other tutorials as well. The light fall off we've talked about before as well, but quickly, the light fall off kind of is the difference between. I'm just going to go back to soft light. The fall off is kind of the difference between. Let's see if we can get this going. See how the it's only lit around the bulbs, and if we turn off our light fall off to none, then we kind of light the whole scene. That's what this is controlling. It's controlling how far the light goes off away from our light rig. So again, check other tutorials to get a little bit more detail on this. But for now, just know that it's judging how far the light travels, and then you could turn that up and down. So this is really small, and we could turn it up and go further. I'm going to turn that off to none. The shadow density, we've again talked about before, but you can see the darkness of the shadows here. If we turn the shadow density down, you start to get lighter shadows. And this helps when trying to do fill lights and stuff like that. The shadow color we've also talked about. If your text or your object or whatever your scene has an overall color cast, you can actually pick a shadow color based on the color cast to give it a little bit more realism. So if you're the most of your scene is kind of bluish, you could pick a blue shadow or a red shadow or something like that, and that'll just give you a little bit more realism in your shadows. I'm going to turn those back to black. We've gone through the fluorescent and round bulb options. Again, those are just the sizes of the bulbs. And again, the extra options at the bottom here, the visibility options, are going to be seen by camera. Turn that off. Now you don't see the bulbs. Standard light we talked about. You want to turn this off if you're using global illumination usually. And GI light, if you want to use these as a reflection in global illumination, but you don't necessarily want them to light the scene. You don't want them to be a bright object in the scene, but you still want them to be visible. You could just say GI light on. You could shut that off, and it'll give you the benefit of using the ring light as a reflection. Let's say you wanted those stripes or whatever we were talking about, but then it won't light your scene in GI. Again, we'll talk about these settings specifically more in the GI tutorials, but those are kind of a brief overview of the ring light controls. I hope to see you in another segment where we talk about all the other stuff that comes with this light kit. So thanks again for getting it, and I'll see you guys in another segment.